Rain-slicked streets reflected the muted glow of Veterans Day memorial lights, but in the quiet corner of a worn-down park bench, an old man sat hunched over, his medals pinned crookedly to a faded jacket. His hands trembled as he held a photograph of a long-lost comrade, the edges frayed, the ink faded from decades of neglect. Around him, families laughed, soldiers saluted, and the world moved on, but he felt invisible. Every cheer felt like a hollow echo in a room that had long since emptied. Lightning split the sky, and the old man flinched, pulling his coat tighter. He had expected this day to pass quietly, as every year had. No visitors, no kind words, just him and memories that refused to fade. Memories of war, of brothers lost in the mud and blood, and promises made in the chaos of gunfire that now felt meaningless in the calm of suburbia. A sudden screech of tires cut through the evening drizzle, startling the few remaining pedestrians. Two motorcycles roared through the empty street, engines throbbing like a heartbeat syncing with the old man's own pulse. He squinted through the rain, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. But no hallucination could explain the leather-clad riders slowing beside him, their headlights piercing the gloom, their presence commanding attention. They didn't speak at first. They simply watched, engines humming a deep, steady rhythm, the kind that promised action. The old man's heart raced, not from fear, but a strange surge of hope he hadn't felt in years. "What? Who are you?" he murmured, voice cracking. One of the bikers lifted a hand, gesturing toward the photograph in the man's grasp. "We've seen what the world forgot," he said softly, yet with authority that cut through the patter of rain. "And we're not letting it stay that way." The old man blinked, incredulous, as the second biker dismounted and knelt, boots splashing in puddles, a respectful nod toward the medals. "It's time someone remembered," they added. For the first time in decades, the old man felt eyes on him that weren't filled with pity or indifference. A storm was coming, not from the sky, but from these riders who had appeared from nowhere, and whatever this night held, it promised to shatter the silence he had lived in for too long. The old man's name was Harold Jensen, a 78-year-old retired Army sergeant who had served in a war that seemed distant to the younger generation but still haunted him every day. After returning home decades ago, he expected a hero's welcome, but instead found indifference. His neighbors barely knew his name, the local council never invited him to ceremonies, and even his family had drifted away, caught in their own lives. Each year, Veterans Day was a reminder of absence, not just the comrades he had lost, but the recognition he deserved but never received. Harold lived in a small, cluttered apartment on the edge of town. The walls were lined with medals, photographs, and letters yellowed with age. Yet despite the tangible evidence of his service, the world seemed determined to forget him. Bills piled up, neighbors avoided him, and local businesses ignored the simple fact that someone like him had given years of his life to protect them. It wasn't just loneliness that weighed him down, it was invisibility, the quiet erasure of everything he had sacrificed. Years ago, Harold had tried to reconnect with old friends, reaching out to his former battalion members, but most had either passed on or retreated into their own lives, leaving Harold alone with the echo of memories. He had once been a man who could command a platoon, strategize under fire, and inspire courage in others. Now, he struggled to find his place in a world that moved too fast to notice him, too busy to care. Despite his resilience, Harold faced daily reminders of injustice. A local cafe refused to offer him discounts given to veterans, claiming he didn't have the right identification. The town's Veterans Day Parade, a once celebrated event, now ignored him, placing him on the sidelines rather than in the procession. Each slight, small as it seemed, accumulated into a mountain of disappointment that pressed down on him daily. Yet Harold wasn't bitter, just quietly heartbroken. He held on to his dignity, maintaining his routine, cleaning his medals, reading letters from fallen friends, and tending to the memories that no one else seemed to care about. Still, there was a spark in him that refused to die, a remnant of the man who had led men into impossible battles and returned, scarred but unbroken. That spark, hidden behind years of neglect, was about to be reignited in a way Harold never imagined. And that spark was exactly what the two bikers had sensed. They had been following whispers, stories of forgotten heroes, of elderly veterans ignored on days meant to honor them. Harold was not just any old man, he was a symbol, a living testament to sacrifice, and the bikers had decided that his story could not end in silence. They would remind the world of his courage, not with speeches or ceremonies, but with action, the kind of action only they could deliver. Tonight, Harold's loneliness was about to collide with a storm of purpose and loyalty. What started as a quiet vigil on a rainy park bench was about to become a night that would change him forever. Harold's evening of quiet reflection was about to face an unexpected storm. Across town, the mayor's office, driven by politics and image, had decided that this Veterans Day would pass without honoring certain veterans, Harold included. Bureaucratic excuses, petty rivalries, and a lack of compassion combined to form an invisible barrier that kept him forgotten. But tonight, that negligence was about to become more tangible. As Harold sat on the park bench, he noticed a group of young men in suits, carrying clipboards and cameras, moving deliberately toward the Veterans Memorial area. They weren't there to honor anyone, they were there to stage a flashy media event, carefully selecting only those veterans who suited their narrative, fit, presentable, and easy to praise. The overlooked, the wounded, the forgotten, Harold among them, were deliberately excluded. He clenched his fists around the photograph of his fallen comrade, a sinking feeling settling into his chest. The injustice was suffocating. For decades, he had fought for his country, yet in the simplest act of recognition, the world had chosen to ignore him. And tonight, under the cold rain and flickering memorial lights, he realized that no one in authority would step up for him. The system that was meant to honor sacrifice had turned its back. From a distance, the young men in suits laughed among themselves, mocking the very idea of veterans who didn't fit their image of heroism. One of them even glanced toward Harold, smirking, whispering to a colleague. The old man's pulse quickened, not with fear of physical harm, but with the humiliation of being dismissed, invisible again in front of the public eye. But just as hopelessness began to close in, the distant roar of engines echoed down the wet streets, breaking through the laughter of the bureaucrats. The sound was thunderous, commanding attention, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. The world might have ignored Harold, but there were others who never would. The storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. A different kind of storm was coming, one that could not be silenced, postponed, or dismissed. And Harold, for the first time that night, dared to hope. The rumble began softly at first, like distant thunder rolling across the city, then grew into a deafening roar that shook the puddles beneath Harold's feet. He looked up, squinting through the rain, and saw them, two motorcycles tearing through the streets, headlights cutting through the dim glow of the evening. They moved with precision, as if guided by an unseen force, engines growling in unison. The bikers slowed to a stop in front of Harold, boots hitting the wet pavement with authority, leather jackets gleaming under the streetlights. Each carried an air of unshakable confidence, a silent promise that they had come for justice. There was no hesitation in their movements, only purpose. One of them, tall with a scar running along his jawline, knelt beside Harold, offering a hand. "Sergeant Jensen?" he asked, voice calm yet firm. Harold nodded, too stunned to speak. The second biker circled, scanning the surrounding area, alert and vigilant. Together, they created an invisible shield around the old man, a fortress of raw strength and loyalty. Harold's heart pounded as the two bikers removed their helmets, revealing faces lined with experience but alight with determination. "We've been looking for you," the first said. "You've been forgotten for far too long." It wasn't just words, they were a promise. The second biker pointed toward the group of young men in suits, who were still organizing their flashy media event, oblivious to the approaching storm. "Tonight, we remind them what real respect looks like," he said. Harold's pulse quickened. Memories of war, of commanding squads under fire, returned, not the fear, but the courage. He realized these men weren't just strangers, they were allies who understood that justice wasn't always delivered through ceremony, but sometimes through presence, through action. The bikers mounted their bikes again, engines roaring like wild beasts. They circled Harold, creating a perimeter that demanded attention. Rain streaked their faces, but they didn't flinch. Each rev of the engine sent a clear message: no more silence, no more neglect, no more invisibility. As they prepared to move forward, Harold felt something he hadn't in years: hope. Not fragile or tentative, but solid, tangible. The world had turned its back on him, but these bikers weren't here to judge, they were here to act. To honor sacrifice the way it deserved, to make sure that a lifetime of courage and pain would not go unnoticed. From the park's edge to the crowded streets, pedestrians turned to watch, mesmerized by the spectacle. It wasn't just a display of power, it was a statement. Together, the bikers and Harold were about to confront not only the indifference of the city but the very system that had allowed him to be forgotten. And in that moment, with engines rumbling and rain pouring down like a cleansing tide, Harold realized, this was the night his story would be rewritten. The two bikers roared through the puddled streets toward the area where the young men in suits had been orchestrating their staged ceremony. Engines thundered, tires splashing water into the night, and the crowd of onlookers couldn't help but stop, mesmerized by the sudden, electrifying presence of these leather-clad figures. Their arrival was cinematic, a storm breaking through the monotony of polite neglect, and it drew every eye toward the small group that had been plotting to humiliate Harold. "Hey! What's this?" one of the young men shouted, stepping forward, his clipboard trembling. "This isn't, you can't." Before he could finish, the first biker revved his engine sharply, the sound like a warning bell. The air vibrated with tension. The crowd instinctively backed away, sensing the force that had entered their midst. The bikers dismounted, boots hitting the wet pavement with a steady, unwavering rhythm. They didn't speak in anger, they didn't need to. Every movement exuded authority, unity, and a promise that injustice would not be tolerated. Harold, standing behind them, felt a surge of courage. He straightened his spine, his chest swelling as the memories of leadership and valor returned. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about every veteran who had been ignored, every act of bravery erased by bureaucracy. The second biker stepped forward, pointing toward the smug organizers. "You've forgotten what respect looks like," he said, voice carrying over the crowd. "You've ignored those who sacrificed everything for your safety and comfort. Tonight, that stops." The young men faltered, realizing that the crowd's attention had shifted. Whispers began to ripple through the bystanders, curiosity, awe, and a growing sense of righteous anger. The bikers' presence had transformed a small, staged event into a moment of public reckoning. One of the organizers attempted to salvage authority. "This is prearranged. We decide who gets recognition." The first biker stepped closer, face stern. "You don't get to decide. Honor isn't for sale, and respect isn't optional. Sergeant Jensen has earned every bit of it, and so have countless others you pretend don't exist." The crowd began to cheer, emboldened by the confrontation. People stepped forward, some recording on phones, some simply witnessing a rare act of real justice. The young men were cornered not just by the bikers but by public scrutiny, their smirks fading into embarrassment and fear. Harold felt tears welling in his eyes as one of the bikers handed him a small megaphone. Trembling, he raised it to his lips. "I fought for a world where others could live free, but tonight, I realize some still fight to forget us. Today, I am not forgotten." His voice cracked but carried through the night, amplified by the megaphone and the energy of the crowd. The bikers flanked him, nodding silently. Their unity was unwavering. And as Harold spoke, the organizers stammered, trying to defend their hollow ceremony, but the truth was undeniable. Courage, sacrifice, and honor cannot be manufactured, they demand acknowledgement, and the world could no longer ignore it. By the time Harold finished, the crowd erupted in applause. The bikers revved their engines once more, the sound echoing like a triumphant anthem. Justice had been delivered, not with violence, but with presence, solidarity, and the courage to confront indifference. For the first time in decades, Harold felt seen. Not as a relic of a forgotten war, but as a man whose life had meaning, whose sacrifices were honored, and whose story had finally been told. Rain had softened to a gentle drizzle as Harold stood amid the dispersing crowd, medals glinting under the memorial lights. The two bikers remained by his side, silent but vigilant, as if ensuring the world would no longer overlook him. For the first time in years, Harold didn't feel small, invisible, or forgotten. He felt alive, recognized, respected, and finally part of something greater than himself. People approached to shake his hand, offer kind words, and ask for photos. Harold smiled, a deep, unrestrained smile that had been buried under decades of neglect. He realized that tonight was more than recognition, it was a reminder that even in a world full of apathy, courage and honor could not be erased. The bikers mounted their motorcycles once more, the engines low and steady this time, like a heartbeat fading into the night. They gave Harold a final nod, a silent acknowledgement that their mission had been fulfilled. Without fanfare, they turned and rode into the darkness, leaving behind a trail of rain-slicked streets and an aura of justice that lingered long after the engines faded. Harold watched them go, a quiet gratitude settling in his chest. He understood that true heroes didn't always demand recognition, they acted when it mattered most, without expectation of reward. Tonight, they had acted for him, for all the veterans who had been overlooked, and for the principle that courage deserves to be seen. As he returned to his apartment later, Harold clutched the photograph of his fallen comrade, now with a renewed sense of peace. Memories no longer haunted him, they reminded him that life, even at its quietest moments, could still hold unexpected honor and profound connection. And for the first time in decades, Harold knew, he had not been forgotten. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Every story deserves to be seen, and every hero deserves to be remembered.